All right, I got an interview with Alex Flint. Okay, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself, mate. And we obviously know each other, so away you go, mate. Tell us what you do and what you're about.
Hi, guys. My name is Alex Flint. I'm Australian from origin. Been in the fitness industry for quite a while now. I'm probably consider myself a bit of a grandfather of the industry. So I'm in my 40s now. I started literally kind of in my parents' gym. So I grew up in Australia. My dad was an Australian weightlifter, representative in Olympic lifting, and my mum has always had a really big, broad nature and love of natural health. So I think those two things combined kind of probably set me up for what happened. So I grew up in and around gyms my whole life. And then by the time I was sort of in high school, I was working in my parents' gyms. And obviously I was, I guess, exposed to a lot of stuff that you probably wouldn't be early on when you're a kid about the fitness industry, and, you know, hanging around with my dad. And sort of I always had a big love of weight training from what I got from him. And then from there, it was kind of just an obvious continuum into where I am now, which is I own a studio in Newmarket in Auckland, which is specialised in group training for people over the age of 35. Before that, sort of I've stepped my way up from the bottom. I trained in sports science and PE, and then taught PE for a few years, but I was always in the fitness industry at the same time. So I was working in gyms, doing a bit of sort of personal training before it was really known as personal training. I was sort of getting paid by people to take them through sessions, when really all there was gym instructors. And then from there, I moved more into PE teaching for a little while, but I still had the love on the side. And during that time, I set up a couple of gyms for actually every school that I was in. I helped set up a reasonable gym. And then moved to New Zealand after being in the UK for a couple of years. So went from Australia to the UK, set up a gym and a school over there while I was coaching rugby. And then once I moved over to New Zealand, I just decided that would be my point where I'd just really take a leap of faith and just go headlong into the fitness industry only. And I started writing courses then for one of the leading personal training organisations, for their NZQA qualifications. And from there, I've really just spent a life sort of upskilling myself. And I've had a few, pretty cool opportunities along the way, trained some celebrities and sports stars and been on movies and things like that. And now I sit in Newmarket in a group training studio.
Yeah, man, so you've done a lot. I never realised you were a PE teacher to start with. So, yeah, that must have been, handling kids and groups kind of the same at some points, being able to lead a class and, being able to have that, be able to project your voice without shouting, is obviously very important when you're doing group training. So you must have got some of that from the kids, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the teaching gives you a really good grounding in a lot of things, about handling groups. Time management is a good one as well, that it gives you a lot of grounding in. And obviously, because I was teaching PE, and in Australia, it's got a fairly solid health curriculum as well. So a lot of the stuff I was doing was the base level work, which really most people, for most clients, everyday people, that's what they need anyway, is a lot of base work. So between that and then, training groups of kids, it certainly helps, yeah.
Yeah, but and then obviously we'll get to sort of some of the sports stuff you've done in the past and stuff. But so obviously you grew up being around gyms. What type of gym was like your dad's gym, and you sort of what type of gym was that? Just like kind of normal gym, or?
So we had my parents started in Australia. This is going back, what are we talking, 30 years ago? Oh, yeah, 30 years ago. Man, I feel old when I say that. We had the Australian Northern New South Wales franchises for all of Les Mills. So the way that Les Mills used to work, it was a franchise model. So you could have an area almost like you would a McDonald's, I guess. So you had the rights to take all of the Les Mills classes within that area. So we had my parents had a network of all through regional country New South Wales and into some of the bigger sort of metropolitan areas. They had the rights to set up as many classes and sessions as they wanted. So some of those ran in gyms, some of those ran in bowling club halls, RSA clubs, all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that was like, I really look back at that time really fondly, So I used to go to huge training events with hundreds of instructors, and I was a kid, and see firsthand sort of what was going on. And I mean, I was a bit oblivious, obviously, to the level of what was happening there, and that this was a worldwide thing. But so that was where it started, and then they used to get, like, I'm not joking, like 150 people to an aerobics class in a town of 20,000 people, because it was so popular that you really got to pay homage to Les Mills and what they did when they put music and dance together.
Yeah.
So yeah, we used to have these huge classes, and so that was sort of where it all started. And then the gyms that we had were pretty much like what you see today as a standard functioning gym. So there was a weights room, weights area, aerobics area. Yeah, pretty much it. You pay your membership for the week. Everyone's in there by themselves. But back then, personal training didn't really exist. You know what I mean? Like, it was. I used to come in, and there'd be clients that would come into the gym that'd be lawyers or people that obviously had a bit more money, and they would just offer to pay me as a 14, 15-year-old kid for a bit of my time, because I was so into it at that stage, like that I had all the old muscle fitness magazines and everything. So I used to take them. I thought it was a good workout at that stage, and yeah, it really went from there. So the gyms were pretty standard, to be honest, not much different from your standard gym model today. Yeah,
it's funny, because I think, I don't know, the gym industry's changed a lot, but then some parts of it is exactly the same. Like you said, a commercial gym back then is just the same as what a commercial gym like now is. It's just one's looks a little bit newer and a bit more lights and mood lighting and a few things like that. But essentially, it's just the same piece of equipment, pretty much doing the same movements.
Yeah. The biggest thing that I think is something which is, obviously, the bigger your gym, the more difficult. If you've got a standard model gym, the more difficult it is to do is the personal touch. So I couldn't tell you sort of. I would imagine that the gyms that my parents owned were between 500 and 1,000 sort of members. So not huge compared to what you see today with like a big scale gym, but they still very much had a sense of, they knew everyone by name. There was a real touch, which I think, in the standard gym model, that's really disappeared, except for independent operators these days. It just doesn't happen, but it's such an important part of the process for clients and for gym members to feel a part and feel at home, so it's something that they'll want to come back to more regularly, I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard, I think, for bigger gyms, because especially when you've got, even though I've worked at a few bigger gyms and then sort of medium-sized gyms, and, you think you've got, usually the client's got 3 or 4 different points of contact rather than like 1 or 2. So you might have like a sales consultant that sees them first, and then a receptionist that deals with something else, and then your fitness instructor, then your personal trainer. So you've got like 3 or 4 different people that you could go to, and they might only see once or twice, and then you get pushed onto someone else. So you don't really create that sort of connection, or long-standing connection anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I think the other thing is as well, it's more likely that that the client is going to be a number in that type of situation. They're not really potentially. It always depends on the care and the expertise of those people in those roles, but quite often the experience that they get is not really with a view to a long-term vision of what they want out of it. It's more a sales process, get them in the door. There's the exercise gear. There you go, get on with it type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. That's pretty much what it is with most gyms, most bigger gyms anyway. I think so you did when you went though sort of said, right, that's it, I'm going into personal training, I'm going into the fitness. Did you do like a lot of sort of one-on-one training to start with, or did you just go straight to sort of doing your writing up courses, or what how did you kind of get about there?
Yeah, I guess because through my time before I finished school and then through uni, I always worked as a fitness instructor, like a gym floor fitness instructor, I had quite a few years of doing just supervisory roles of, walking the floor in the gym, talking to clients, looking at technique, writing basic programs for newbies. Yeah. They're 3-month fitness updates and that type of thing that you get in a standard gym.
Yeah.
And then once I got into PE, I taught PE for about 4 or 5 years. So during that time, I didn't do a lot of sort of instructing, but obviously I was around kids and sport and that type of thing all day, and I was still training myself. And then so when I moved to New Zealand and I got straight into it, I actually just thought I'm going to upskill myself a little bit first again. So I already had my degree and I had a fitness cert, which is just a basic fitness cert from Australia. So I went and did a couple of extra courses. They were just the local ones at the time. I think I did the UT Fitness Professionals one. And then I decided that I wanted to spend a bit more time doing floor work first. I'd come back from the UK at this stage, and I thought I just want to get a sense of what it's like over here first. And I'm a big believer in that. Your exposure to people is really important. So we can put ourselves out there online. We can use all forms of different formats of advertising and those types of things. And now we've got social media, but there's nothing like word of mouth and actually being around people. So that was sort of my first inkling that I thought, what I'll do is I'll find myself a good gym that I can work in that allows me some hours. I mean, I'm not even sure how many of these exist anymore, so where I can work as a fitness instructor, and then I might be able to start doing some PT on the side. So that's kind of how I got into it over here.
I think that's like a massive point for people to take away. Is one, you're highly skilled already, had years of experience, and yet you still took the time out rather than jumping in the deep end. You took time to kind of assess the situation, do a little bit of upskilling, and make sure you're kind of ready to go straight into it. And then when you did start, it was, okay, let's do some fitness instructing roles. Like you said, there's not many of them around, but there's lots and lots of gyms that actually do, like, we run internships here, and there's lots of gyms like, that allow people to come and do some hours, whether it's voluntary, whether it's getting paid, or you just, doing a bit of learning on the side whilst taking some sessions for them. I think that sort of stuff, like I said, is invaluable in it, because, getting experience, even if you've got experience, every gym is different. Doesn't matter which one you go to. Everyone has like a different type of clientele, different atmosphere, different kind of culture. So, it's very important for people to sort of, even if you've got experience, you can still always get more, and it just depends on the situation, eh?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's a good way for you to ground yourself in all the really important skills. Like, it's one thing to know how to write a program. It's a whole other thing how to adapt that to a person that rocks up in front of you in the gym. Because there's what's perfect and what's optimal, and then there's what's realistic. And also on top of that, your people skills are so important. Your sense of kind of where you want to pitch yourself in the industry as well. So who it is that you'd really like to work with. And obviously, the more specialized the industry gets, the more ability there is for a sort of niche eventually into who it is that you really want to work with. But, you've got to take your time figuring out who that is and looking at whether there's actually a market for it as well, which obviously it's good to think, I think probably I'm no different from a lot of guys that got in when you first got into the fitness industry. You're all about strength and power and sports people, and partly for yourself, but also for the fact that it's it's the glitz and glamour. But you realise pretty quickly that your options are fairly limited there, and you would have to continue to specialise and go down that rabbit hole if you really want to get there. So the exposure early on to give yourself as many different looks as what you could do is really important.
Yeah, I think, we talked about niches in a few other shows, episodes, and, I've changed my niche several times. I think that's the beauty of the industry. You can just change, you can do one-on-one a lot, and you can go to groups, and you can do, more like boot camp style stuff, and you can do more strength stuff, lower back care, women, there's so many different avenues you can go down. And if you learn about one thing, you're never not going to use it again, even if you don't particularly train that type of client anymore. you can always upskill, always learn. And I know you've done, I consider myself a bit of a course kind of whore and like trying to do as many courses as possible. But I know you've probably done more than I could imagine.
I shudder to think how much money I've spent on courses over the years. Loved it though, I think it's an important point though, upskilling. I've found that of the 3 countries I've lived in, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK, that probably here has the least readily available ongoing training and good quality. It's definitely improving, but to get good quality courses in New Zealand is harder, and I think a lot of it is actually because the New Zealand fitness industry is less likely, they don't value it as much as they should in terms of continuing to learn and continuing to upskill. So because of that, it's harder for good quality presenters and courses to happen over here. But luckily, obviously now with a lot of online learning and that type of thing, it's easier to access stuff. But I mean, if I look back to sort of 15 years ago when I first landed over here, there was very little. There was just so little other than your basic certs. You were on your own in terms of what you're learning.
I think even over the last 6-7 years, since I've been here 11 years now. I think that maybe the last 5-6 years, I've started to notice more internationals coming over. I think what part of the podcast is as well is I think like New Zealand's got so many great trainers within New Zealand as well. And I think, there needs to be probably more like Kiwi trainers creating their own courses, and doing their own upskills, because, especially now with the whole COVID thing, it's going to be a lot harder. International travel is going to be, could be off the table for quite a while. It's the time now for people to kind of step up and kind of be like, well, you know what, I've definitely got something I can give, something to share. And start, maybe creating their own courses, building their own courses as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. There's a hell of a lot of talent over here that's quite hidden. Yeah, everyone
kind of just hides. So whenever you want to make your course, mate, I'm sure there'll be plenty of people waiting around, waiting for it. You kind of went down said about the sports and going down that kind of training the athletes, and for new trainers, a lot of people want to do that. And like you said, it's a very niche market. Generally, a lot of if you're talking, say, fighters, for instance, a lot of them haven't got any money to start with, and they don't make a lot of money till you kind of get to the top of the sport. So you trained some fighters. How did you kind of get around that? Did it just come about, or did you reach out, or did they reach out to you?
Yeah, so I think to start with, what happened with me is it was a little bit where I situated myself. So I was aware that if I found the right facility, that I'd be more likely at that stage to attract that type of clientele. So obviously, the biggest thing I think, and it's one of the big lessons that I realised when I really tried to crack into the strength and conditioning of sports, was that in New Zealand, being a smaller market, largely, like you say, that novice athletes haven't got a lot of money to throw around. And those that are professional athletes in most of the big sports over here they're swallowed up by, their training for their clubs and that sort of thing. So there's not a lot of free agents roaming around with a lot of money that have got to invest in private personal training and sports conditioning and that sort of thing. So what I had largely to start with is a number of I did a lot of Charles Poliquin's work, who, for those that don't know, Charles, unfortunately, he's passed away now, but he was someone who, if you look at the industry now, has got such a huge lineage. So there's so many trainers out there that 10, 15 years ago, I met on courses, on Poliquin courses. Whether that was all because there was, we all had these sort of like-minded ideas on things, but it was definitely a case of he was someone who had just so much to give and so much knowledge. At times he was polarizing and, there was controversial with bits and pieces, but he certainly had some absolute gold amongst everything else. And so what I did after I learned a lot of this stuff from him, I just started to implement it with who I could find. So I was putting offers out for, it was amateur rugby players at that stage, and then I started to get a bit of a sniff with a couple of fight groups. So it was actually through one chance meeting that with a female jiu-jitsu athlete who got me in touch with her coach, and then sort of I was very much looking to get into training fighters, so I went and approached those guys, and then my sort of my experience in the flourish from there, really. So I got, again, just started with some, you know, athletes who were up and coming, gave my time, realised that in the early days I wasn't going to make my money out of these people, but if I wanted to do it, it was almost like I had to sponsor them, if you know what I mean. So I had my bread and butter clients on the side who were my mums and dads and lawyers and doctors and, you know, accountants and those guys, and then I had my 10-15 hours a week, which I'd make very minimal money out of training amateur fighters. And then slowly that sort of started to build, and I got a bit of a name. And then, and then sort of I worked my way up the ranks with different fighters from there on in.
Yeah, I think what people expect is, you know, you kind of do your course. It's like even when you're looking for sort of general population, Gen Pop, you kind of do your course and you put it out there. I'm a personal trainer, and you expect everyone to flood to you. Same if you do strength and conditioning. You know, you can be the best strength and conditioning coach, but unless someone experiences it or sees the results from it, it's very hard to build, you know, your credibility or to build a following, or, you know, so you've got to give up time. And, you know, it's just the same, like, you know, like you said, you did fitness instructing first. Even after all that experience, even when you went to do strength and conditioning with, you know, with fighters and people like that, you still kind of just said, right, I'll help you out, and kind of did a bit of, like you said, kind of sponsored them in a way, because you're not really taking much money. So
you've got to be willing to build networks, you know, and that's something which takes time and effort and a bit of sweat and hard work. And, you know, realize that in the early days, regardless of what type of training it is that you're going to end up doing, that, you know, you're probably not going to make your money back in the early days for the time and the effort that you're putting in. But in the long term, if you build those networks, the deeper you get into the right networks, as long as you can identify what they are, you know, and that you're in the right circles, it's going to pay dividends long term. But you've got to be willing to put the groundwork in and do the time, you know.
I think that's one thing, you know, nothing against the generation, the younger generation now, but it's very instant gratification. Everyone wants everything now as soon as possible. And, you know, like you said, like, you've got to put the time in, just like training, you know. We've been around, you see so many, you know, get 6 figures in 21 days or 6 figures in 6 weeks and all this other shit that gets spouted out across the internet. You know, everyone's in it for a lot. You've got to be in it for the long term and think sort of, you know, long term, you know, where do you want to be? Who have you got to see? What networks you got to build, relationships, and then nurture those relationships as well. You know, you've got to be able to give something to get something back.
Absolutely, yeah. There's no, you know, even with all the glitz and glamour and sparkle and, you know, magic promises, there's just no. I think the best way that I can explain it is, when I was a kid, I had a lawn mowing, you know, local lawn mowing run. I had 4 or 5 lawns that I had, and I got those through making up some pamphlets and putting them in the letterboxes of my local area, you know, and I managed to get a few clients out of it, and mowed their lawns for a few years. But the minute that I stopped putting a pamphlet in the letterboxes, so I put out one lot, got a few clients out of it, and I thought that was it. So I stopped putting them out, and that was the end of it. You know, I never really got any more than those 4 or 5 lawns to mow. Whereas really what I needed to do was go out every day and keep doing that, you know, like putting myself out there in one way or other. And whether it was that, you know, I needed to ask those guys that I was mowing the lawns, did they know anyone else that wanted their lawn mowed, you know, but I was too young to realise anything like that. But I mean, that's the reality of whatever path you choose to take to get yourself out there and market yourself. It's a process, and it's never ending, you know, like whether or not if you become an absolute success on social media, you've still got to be putting out content all the time. It's just, it doesn't stop. Like it's a full-time job, whether you're an online trainer, whether you're in the gym, whatever it is, it's always, you can't stop. And the biggest thing is the momentum takes a while. Like they say, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah, that's it, exactly. And like you said there, that's a prime example. Even though you're young, I do it now. Even you like do your marketing, you get a load of leads, you think, right, I'm good, and then you maybe take your foot off the gas for a little bit, and it only takes 1 or 2 weeks off, next minute you're like, oh shit, I've not really had that many leads this week. And when you put your foot down again, and so it's especially for young trainers who think you're starting out, you think you just do a few things here and there, you get a couple of clients, and next minute everyone's going to come to you. You just have to keep repeating what's working to keep building. Otherwise, it can all suddenly you lose 1 or 2 clients and you're back to square one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just such an important point that you never lose sight of that. It's building over time, and like you say, you've got to realize that it's a cumulative effect, but you can't, you've got to hold on to the people that you've got, but you've got to be always thinking, where's my next client coming from?
Yeah, I think we'll go going back to one of your points before was, you put yourself in a position where you knew that type of client was going to come in. So, I've worked at gyms where there's no chance a fighter would come and train there because it's just not that type of gym.
Yep.
I think that's important. If you're a new trainer and you're looking for gyms, don't just go to ones that offer you, because everyone can get a PT job pretty much. Like, you're very, very unlucky if you don't, because generally gyms want PTs, whether you did last or don't last. They want to take your rent. They've got their own KPIs. They've got targets to hit themselves. So knowing where you want to train before actually going there and starting to take a job somewhere, or even approach them for a job is very important. Did you check out quite a few gyms first, or?
Yeah. So what I did was, when I first went strictly back into personal training, I found an affluent area, and I found a gym that was nice, that I knew would suit, and I went and approached them, and that's where I trained out of. So I started there, and that way I knew I would build up, reasonably quickly. I could build up a clientele based on just that there was going to be people that could afford that there. And then once I had that under control, then I started to look further afield, and found my sort of strength and conditioning gym, which was totally the opposite end of the scale. Like, one was very shiny and had private bathrooms, and it was access for the more elite, I guess, style of clientele. And then at the other end, it was lucky if the taps worked sometimes in the bathrooms, and like us floor. But that was my love. I loved that type of environment. I loved the getting down and dirty, and having the tools to condition athletes, and especially fighters. And so even though potentially on the surface it wasn't as great an opportunity, for me it was, because that was where my passion lay. Yeah,
that's it. Getting to where you want to be. There's lots of different routes we could go down. I think we'll probably get you on again if you're available. Like, one of the things that I wanted to go down was, I know you've had kind of business mentoring and stuff yourself, as have I, and I think one of the things for young trainers is to having that support and stuff. And even for us now, I know I need support. 17 years on, I still need that support from other people outside of my gym. And like, how have you always had sort of a mentor, or always had people helping you along the way? Or?
Yeah, I to start with, it wasn't a mentor as such. I just had this prolific need to go and do courses with. I just used to seek out the best people I could find in a field. So it was probably before business coaching and mentoring became what it is today. So I would, literally, I was in Sweden, the States, all over the place. A lot of time in Australia, going and seeking out who I've deemed to be the best in the industry, and just learn straight from them, because I actually started that by chance in New Zealand. I stumbled upon a guy that came across from Australia, and I felt like in 10 days I learned more than I learned in 3.5, 4 years of uni. It was just astounding, and it was because it was specific industry experience. So from then on, I just thought, this is how, and he actually said to me, you know, one of the things you need to do is pay for people's time. Like if you've got something that you want to really specialize in. This again was before, you know, business coaching was probably the formal kind of thing that it is today. You go and ask for some time and pay for a couple of hours of knowledge with them. So yeah, that was kind of how I started. So I did that for a lot of years and spent a lot of money, but it got me ahead quickly because I got, you know, the sort of the inside and the real, I guess, the inner circle knowledge about things that I needed to know about at that stage. And that's the same with business coaching. So in the last few years, I didn't really start getting mentors specifically in terms of a one-on-one style mentor until I looked to open up my studio. And that was because I just didn't have the nous to really know how to run a business that was more than just me. You know, I consider myself a good trainer, but when it came to running a business and managing other people and all that sort of thing. So I guess you can say, yeah, I've always had a mentor in one way, shape or form. It just kind of the relationship changed. And then, in the last 5 years, I've had a couple, and it's been all mostly around business building because I've done the groundwork in the training myself prior to that.
Yeah, I think that's where most people generally need it. I know I definitely need it. You know, I'm still a bit loose with my numbers and loose with, you know, my spreadsheets and stuff like that. And I think, you know, when you're just starting out and you get your first few paychecks, or, you know, you get your first 10, 15 clients and they're paying you each week and you're living week to week and it's fine, but then something happens, then you start to realize, you know, you need to be able to manage your money that little bit better. And then as soon as you do want to do something like, you know, open a gym, even opening a boot camp, which might be outside, you need to pay for equipment, then you might need to pay for extra trainers, and then you kind of really, your business turns into like a proper business as such, because you really have to start juggling things around. With your sort of training, I think you're saying that you traveled all over the world to see different trainers and spending time. You know, I definitely agree with that. I think when you spend time with someone, you get so much more information. You can ask so many questions, and someone shows you there, you remember exactly how they did it. For me, anyway. You know, like, I think that's one thing. Maybe train people now. Even with the online training, do you find you still get the same benefit when you maybe do like an online course to actually go in? I know I don't, but what about yourself?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I realized really early on is that I would come back from a course where I was with other people like me, totally pumped up, like I was on. You know, I'd come back fizzing and I'd be full of new knowledge, but I'd also networked with a whole lot of people that were just like me, that were really enthusiastic and, you know, wanted to go somewhere and be somebody within the industry and just, you know, be the best they could be. And the combination of those two things, the knowledge, but also being around those people, was huge. Like it would really pump me up, and I would feel like I would grow in the next 6 to 12 weeks after doing a course like that more than I would, you know, for the rest of the year. And largely a lot of that was because of the motivation that I would get from being in the room with those people. One, the professional, you know, the guy or girl out the front, but also just being around, you know, like having these networks of other people like yourself. So I definitely think that whenever I can, I will still go to a live course if it's possible. You know, obviously on the other side of the coin, the ability to get knowledge from someone on the other side of the world instantly is a great thing as well. Personally, what I've found with that though is I probably don't put the level of value on it once I've got that information, if you know what I mean. So I can pretty much, every live course I can be on, I can remember all of the good stuff. I know it all, you know, it's in me from some of this stuff's 15, 20 years ago. You know, I can still remember experiences. But I know that a lot of the courses I bought online are half finished, if that, like, and there's probably some absolute golden. But I mean, whether that's a learning style, being in my 40s, I need to be in a classroom. Maybe I'm not used to the whole online learning as much. But yeah, I value in face-to-face, in-person stuff the most.
Yeah, I think it's common. I mean, it might be. I'm exactly the same. I can tell you exactly. I can repeat nearly sometimes what the trainer has taught me. When they're teaching a class or teaching an exercise, I can nearly repeat exactly how they did it, and where the coaching cues was just from remembering how they did it. But then when I watch something, I have to watch or read, especially reading. I have to read something 3, 4, 5 times till it actually sinks in.
Yeah.
So I think it's very valuable for people. If you can get to an actual course, or do an internship, or go and just shadow a trainer, do some voluntary work. That's where you're going to make the sort of biggest sort of brain gains. You're going to be able to excel yourself a little bit more.
And I think it also sets a standard to realize what level is out there as well. I had no idea when before I started traveling, I had no idea at the level of education and ability that people in the industry had. And sorry, excuse me, I've got my phone ringing. I'll just turn it off.
All right.
Yeah, it was when I started traveling, see these other trainers, I was thinking, man, the level of professionalism I've got to lift as well, to be up there. And that was something that I never would have done online, because I would have had no clue.
Yeah, that and like you said about getting pumped up, I've gone on so many courses, and I think the last big one I went on was when I went to the States, and I'd had my gym for like a year and a half, and I was kind of like, I'm doing all right here. I'm still surviving, kind of, profitable. It's going all right. And you go get put in a room, and there's some people who are just starting, and there's others who've got 5 gyms. There's some who've got like 20,000 members, and you're like, shit. And then you just get even more pumped up. And then like you said, having the questions they ask, you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. Or that's you then step, start saying in it, if you think you're the cleverest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. You need to go keep leveling up. When it comes down to say young trainers, people who are just starting out in the industry, what advice would you give them? What's kind of like your main piece of advice you'd give them?
I think the biggest thing is patience, but at the same time, don't confuse patience with being too comfortable. So you hit the nail on the head, especially as a trainer. You can start to make a decent income quite quickly if you're lucky. You strike on a few well-heeled clients that are in a network work or so, and all of a sudden, you're making a reasonably decent amount of money. But it's kind of a false economy, because it's only based on a couple of people. So on one side, there is this ability to potentially feel like you're doing really well quite quickly, but actually you're far from it, because you're 1 or 2 people away from being the opposite again and being right down the bottom of the pack. Which something like obviously this whole pandemic that's going on at the moment makes you realize probably the biggest thing that you can do is understand that systems and processes, and looking at a long-term way to build a business which has got residual income, which is generating money when you're not in it, is your long-term goal. So, in the short term, you might be just you, and you're paying for, people are paying you for the hour that you're training them, but you have to be looking down the line of, how do I get out of that model, and how do I, over time, create something which allows me to generate income when I'm not training. But that is a long process, like you can't just invent that overnight. And I actually tried, when I first sort of came across the idea through talking to one of my clients, I thought, all right, I'm going to create an online model. I spent a huge amount of money. This is going back probably about 9 or 10 years. But what I created, it didn't have enough. It had a good roll on for a short period of time, but it was only because I was involved with the UFC at that stage. So I was, I had a profile, but actually what I'd created just wasn't really relevant to the people I was trying to train online. So, there's just a long-term process. But yeah, that my biggest bit of advice is understand that systems and processes, and your long-term goal is not to trade money for time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we've all been there. I mean, the amount of websites I've made, membership sites that never been launched, online training, all this, and we're all the same. We all are looking at, ways of trying to create something that, we're essentially not trading on time for money. But it takes a long time. And I think, get great at what you do. Then you can do things like open your own studios, open your own boot camps. Even in commercial gyms, I've seen trainers hire other trainers because they're so busy because they've got a style of training, a system that they train their clients in that can be replicated. Because people, essentially, you want people to come to you not just for you, but for the training systems as well. And if you can get those systems, you get those systems for someone else to do, and they might be happy to do that as well. So, and there's lots of ways of doing it to still get paid and not essentially be in front of the client as well.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, like exactly what you've said. You've got to be a master of your own craft to start with. So you've got to become an expert. You've got to become well respected, and you've got to be really empathetic and good with people. That's the basis of it all. When you're looking after people's health and fitness, you've got to be a really good people person, and that's a skill in itself. Once you've got that, and then once you've got the basic skills to be a good trainer yourself, then you start to look down the path of I'm making some money. People are seeing me for the right reasons, and now how can I turn that into a long-term business, not just a time for money exchange.
I think I think there's a couple of different types of trainers. I mean, I'm not sure if you'll agree, but there's trainers where you start out and you think, okay, this is great. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to be a PT. Perfect. Do your course. Think you're going to make lots of money. You may last 2, 3 years, 4, 5 years, but then it kind of peters out because you kind of don't get bored of the fact, working every morning, working every evening. And then there's people who are in it long term. I think it does take a few years to realize maybe where you want to be. But then you kind of have to think about, okay, where am I going to be in, if I'm going to take this career seriously, where am I going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And because, essentially that's when you've got to start learning, where I need to grow and what kind of business business person, as well as trainer you kind of want to be. Did you always know that you wanted to be a gym owner? Was that kind of like the goal from the start, or?
I always wanted to have a gym at some stage. I wasn't sure what that gym was going to look like or what it was. For a long time, I just wanted to be athletic development. That was it. I wanted, a gym that basically had the ability to cater for that type of thing. But then the more time I spent, I realized I was probably in the wrong country to do that. But not saying it's impossible. It's far from it. And, there's plenty of good ones around, but it's just a more difficult proposition. So I guess the way that I looked at it was I needed to go through the right steps, and I knew that I did want a gym at some stage, but I wasn't really that sure how to go about it because the leap seemed so big, from trainer, one person, with not a lot of, I came from a blue collar working background. My parents were, we had gyms, but I didn't really learn too much of it myself. And so it was a lot of learning on my feet as I went. I think, I would have invested in a mentor earlier had it been around. But the biggest thing that I noticed now is, and we touched on it at the start of our interview, is knowing who's actually reputable. It's a minefield because, hey, if it's on the internet, it must be true, right? What they're claiming must be true. And it's, to know that you've got, everyone says that, they're the trainer that's been there and done it and they've actually proved it. But, whether or not they have, it's a real potential for disaster and spending a lot of money on people that don't, help you with what you need. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It definitely is a minefield, and you know, you can spend a lot of money on a lot of courses, a lot of mentorships. Not, and it's not necessarily sometimes the information. Sometimes it's just the person doesn't resonate with you, or you know,
Yeah.
you got to find that person that you respect. And I think, you know, it can be hard to find that, and it's doing it online again is one of the things that is good, but I think you need to go and see that person in person. Because when you get to hang out with them when they're not in front of the camera, you kind of get to a good gist of kind of what type of person they are, and you know whether you want to keep investing more time and money in them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to
Yeah.
know what your
So
weaknesses are as well, you know, like what it actually is that you really need. I mean, is it accountability? Is it you need to push? Is it that you're actually weak in, you know, a business, like the ability to create a business system? What is it that truly are your weaknesses? And you've got to find a match there as well, you know, because it's just, I mean, it's exactly the same when you think about training your clients. Quite often it's not a lack of information that's the issue, it's the implementing it.
that's it. That's it. And that's I think the other thing with, yeah, I'm part of many online courses, and like you said, I've got many online courses that I haven't finished. That's just sat there getting ready to finish. But that's it, the accountability, and you know, having someone maybe deciding what you actually need. You know, it's great to do all the courses possible. And I think one thing I've learned over the years, although I do some courses just for me, because that's what I want to learn.
Yeah.
I think sometimes doing courses for what's going to benefit your clients and your clientele that you're training, rather than just something that, you know, looks really good, or you know, it might be completely what you're into, but might not actually help your clients at all.
Yeah, no, totally agree. There's personal interests and what your clients need quite often are two totally different things. Yeah.
Yeah, and especially when you're younger, you think, oh, you know, you tend to train. I remember training clients how I used to train, you know, and I probably beat them up more than what, you know, and what they needed. And I kind of look back and I'm like, but you only know what you know at the time.
That's right. Yeah.
If there was one trainer or one, you know, you mentioned Poliquin before, and I think a lot of people now disregard some of his stuff because, you know, some of his later stuff, and you know, he kind of went off here and there a little bit, but you know, his stuff is absolutely amazing. I don't think you can get to where he got, and so many gold medals, and you know, he knew so much, he has so much knowledge. Is there a trainer that you can think of that you'd say, okay, you know, he really kind of helped, he really shaped me without him maybe knowing? He was kind of the person that did mentor me. I've got a friend of mine that I know mentored me, but he didn't really know it. He just, you know, someone I always kind of looked at and followed.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, you know, like I would probably, I think from a training perspective, so with Charles, I was really lucky with him. So he actually gave me a couple of scholarships to travel internationally and do courses with him. So I actually got a bit of extra time up close with him, you know, having some one-on-one time, which was great. And I was actually going to start lecturing for him, but just the international travel just got too. I just couldn't do it because I had, you know, first baby on the way and that type of thing. So I think really he did shape me a lot. What there was a lack of with his stuff, he was, you know, as good as it got within athletic training. And yeah, he made some pretty bold claims at times, which a lot of them, you know, you certainly couldn't say would be backed by peer-reviewed research. However, the stuff that I learned from him, you could implement and it would work. You know what I mean? Like, so down the track, he got more into nutritional supplementation, that type of thing. And that's kind of different. I'm more so talking about his training as such. But what I learned from him was systemizing your training. Like, you need a step-by-step approach. And the thing that I likened that to was actually gymnastics. So I used to look at gymnastics, and, you know, you look at the levels you take. So my little girl, she started pre-competition, and then from level 1 to level 2, and you can't move up the levels until you're a master of the level beforehand. So if you can't do the skills, number 1, you're not strong enough, and number 2, you're not physically ready to go to the next step. And so that combined with what I learned from Charles, I realised that there is a real progression that people should learn the right to move to the next step in terms of advancing their style of exercise rather than jumping in the deep end and doing all the cool stuff to start with. So I think he was probably my biggest influence. But then in terms of overall, I actually, I had my stepdad, he was a PE teacher, and he probably had the biggest influence over me in terms of calm and level-headedness in education, like how to actually teach people something like a skill in a way that it would stick, and how the need probably that coaching is different from person to person. So probably, to be honest, it's him. So he's a PE teacher. He wasn't even in the fitness industry, but he had a lot of influence on probably the way I conduct myself and the way I interact with my clients. Yeah,
that's cool. I think it doesn't always need to be someone in the industry, and it's the little things, it's the small things, like you said. Then being able to coach someone, how you interact with them, how you change your tone of voice, how you getting something to be able to make sure that person who is different to the next person can learn that exercise and using the right words and cueing so that they understand, which to the next person could be completely different.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, probably just sort of reflecting on it now that you've asked the question, is actually a level of patience as well. So I was by nature, I've always been kind of wanting, I want it to happen right now. So I've always been like that. So I'd push hard, or I'd spend the money that I needed to go and do the course, or, I had to have the right information to do it the fastest, with the most and the best. Whereas his approach was more, this is going to take time. Like, you can't expect to make this person brilliant overnight. You can't change their habits overnight. You can't teach them a complex skill overnight. So just step back from that and realize that, everything is a process over time. And that's probably the biggest thing that, the influence that's probably helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think I think everyone's the same, You want it now, what can I do? I'll work all night, I'll push hard, I'll do whatever I can to get to where you want to be. And sometimes it's just time, It does take time.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the go back to the sort of Poliquin principles. I think that's a book that's kind of timeless. If anyone is listening and they want a book to read, I think it's only really like an ebook, really. But the Poliquin principles. I remember reading that, and I got so much from that. It's pretty awesome book.
Yeah, he's got two. There's the Poliquin principles, and there's another one. I can't think of the name of it. It's like the science and practice of strength training or something like that. So, they're two books that, they stand the test of time, those ones. And a lot of that, I think, this is obviously more so about the nuances of training, but even down to, and again, some of it's been disproven, it's not that important, but him looking at, time under tension and tempo of an exercise. Yeah, it might not be everything, like there's just as much evidence to suggest that you don't need it, but what it would do is standardize what you were giving people. And that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from that sort of thing. So you were standardizing the approach that you were giving. So even if you weren't in the room with them, you knew that they were following the training exactly the same way. So, the reps were timed, the rest, the time under tension, the tempo, all of those things were standardized in a way that you were providing a quality workout, whether you were there or not. And that was, part of my wake up to systemizing what you do.
Yeah, the time and attention. I mean, like you said, there's so much research out there, and so many courses I've done with time and attention kind of getting disproven and stuff. But it's probably one of the things that I've always took from Poliquin, and one of the things that, like you said, it's one of those things that, especially if you're a new trainer and you've got a client and you're trying to get them to not rush through the exercise, or you've got someone who's like a personality, just wants to go hard, and as soon as you start adding things like time and attention, whether it's gives you so much more benefit or not, it, like you said, it standardizes it and it slows them down without having to keep telling them to slow down. It's like, okay, this is what we got to do, this is how you do it. And then secondly, I think if you're doing now with the online training, if you're not going to be there every session, but you tell them this is how many reps, how many seconds you do on the way down, how many seconds you hold, how many seconds on the way up, how many seconds you hold, you don't need to be there. They just need to follow the protocol, and then away you go.
Yeah, totally. The other thing that just quickly on probably one of the big learnings I got was, like I say, you knew what was your progression as well. So you would start with, I mean, it's fundamentals, but you would start with an assessment procedure, which would be assess the way that someone moves, and then give them the exercises based on what's the most appropriate based on their level of assessment. So then you knew from that point forward what was your next exercise. Whereas an army plane flying over here. Yeah, and you knew what was coming next. So not only could you standardize the reps and the sets and the speed and those types of things, you also had a logical progression of exercises from A1 beginner right through to advanced trainer over a period of time, and just made it so simple. Then you could take you didn't have to spend so much time designing programs, and then I could move on to other stuff that was important in the business as well.
Yeah, I think that's, we do that at the internship. I get people to go through, the different movements, and then, okay, this is our baseline, this is your baseline. Different people may have different baselines, but find your baseline, have regressions, and you only need, 4 or 5 different either way. And then you've got every different tool you can use in a gym: kettlebell, bag, dumbbell, barbell, and then there you go. You've got like an unlimited amount of exercises nearly, without having to do crazy exercises, and it just makes things so much easier for you to to program.
Yeah, and logical. Like you're actually not just choosing an exercise and throwing it in there. Like you've got a sense of reasoning for why you're choosing that one.
Yeah, definitely. I know we've been on for a while now, so I definitely have to get you back on if you're keen for talk about training. Because I could talk to you for hours about training and the way things, how you do things. And I think, like, even what you just mentioned then is so valuable for new trainers, because trainers, when they first start out, you get taught the basics, and you get to probably have to write one program, hand it in, they tick it off, and away you go. But then what's the next second, third, fourth? You've been training someone 4 years, what do you do? So it'd be awesome to get you on, talk about that sort of stuff as well.
Yeah. I'm always up for a chat.
Cool, mate. Well, it's been great chatting to you, and thanks for your time. I'm sure everyone's going to get lots of takeaways there, and we'll get you on again soon, eh?
Cheers, Matt. Good to catch up.
Cool, mate.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, Alex. See you, mate.